Okay, so this week in testing for Grand Prix Toronto and even further on Pro Tour Vancouver, just so I have a really good baseline on standard, I'm going to be playing Dragon Control, which after the Pro Tour looked to be one of the best decks, and then after this weekend's Grand Prix in Krakow, which as I'm recording this right now is currently in the finals with Robin Dollar and Alexander Hayne playing a mirror match of this exact deck. Um, this is pretty clearly the deck to beat right now. This list I have shamelessly stolen from one Jarvis U. Some notes on the differences between these top 8 lists we're seeing in this list. There's less anticipate, more big card draw spells, and then 3 dissolve instead of disable stroke. Um, this list is definitely better suited for the mirror. Anticipate's okay. I think I'm with Adrian Sullivan on it probably being a little too slow or a little too clunky. I'd rather just have the big card draw spells to take over games. And so far that's matched like my limited experience, but we'll see how that goes. Uh, Realistically, the only reason this deck is Esper Dragons is this card. Um, Counterspell's good, turns out. Shocking. Like 3 mana Counterspell is already good. This card's just exceptional. Without this card, you would probably not be seeing these decks with 5 dragons and Haven. Well, they probably have Haven and some number of dragons, but they wouldn't be like 5 dragons. They wouldn't be 5 dragons even just for this card, even though this card's pretty solid. Uh, yeah. There's not too much to really talk about this deck because it's really well defined in terms of just like the same cards going on over and over. There's an Evolving Wilds over the Flooded Strand on Jarvis U's suggestion there. We'll see how the 13th tap line plays out. The sideboard, you've got a bunch of hitters and a bunch of one-shot answers. That's basically how a lot of the sideboard and standard look. This lets you transform for the mirror. It's worth noting that one of the reasons that Esper Dragons is actually so good is because Fall Tongue Invocation is just so good in the mirrors. Because all the threats are hexproof. That's like the big draw to this deck is that you just get to play a bunch of hexproof threats, and this card just kind of ignores that. The other draws, I guess, aside from this card, which again in the mirror, the fact that you have 9, you'll notice I've stacked these out. We have card draw, stack interaction. Sorry about that. We have the card draw stack, the on stack interaction, the in play interaction, and the threats. The fact that you get to play so many more on the stack interaction cards than the normal blue-black deck is really huge. I guess like most blue-black decks would maybe get to 8 main deck, like 2 Thoughtseize, 4 Dissolve, and 2 Disable Stroke. But having Stroke not being able to re-up in a counter war is pretty huge. Or at least defensively. It's a lot like how, I guess like Last Word or Counterflux works, right? Where if you play a spell and then they play a counter and then you counter with your uncounterable counterspell, uh, you strike that. It's actually the reverse with stroke. If you stroke their action instead of having a dissolve, then they counter back and then you have another stroke. That's fine. But when you're playing defense, like you can't like play a dragon with 2 up and then counter their or dig with 2 mana up or 3 mana up or whatever, and then they play their counter. You can't stroke back on their counter. So that like being able to re-up on the interaction, those kind of counter wars is really huge. There's also one less Haven. We'll see how that goes. I don't know how big that is in the mirror or not. 0 Dragon Lord Silum Garmain seems great. I like the whole all hexproof threats main. Ugin's just kind of a win the game card. I mean, it's how the card always is, right? It's a sweeper that incidentally kills them. There's a lot of Stratus answers in the board because that's post-board when people start taking out removal, being able to get in underneath it with a threat is pretty huge. We'll see if that's better than negate. I've been told by Jarvis that it is. Besides that, the rest should be pretty self-evident. There might be like 1 to a few Drown in Sorrows, but we'll see on that. That might not be true for Magic Online. And honestly, I think Drown is kind of overstated against the red decks. I think it's very easy for them to play around it because their removal spells are so good at, or their threats are so good at going a little bit wide around removal nowadays. It's not like they play like 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop. It's like Dragon Fodder, Hordley Outburst. And you're like, well, I just got 2 cards, but that's not insane. And then like their follow-up is like another pretty heavy hitter. Like it was good out of the Obzon deck. It's also possible on the draw that it's just like a little, I don't want to say too slow, but the amount of damage they've dealt by the time that card is resolved is pretty significant. So yeah, I'm really just playing this deck to see if anyone can beat me. And if people start beating me with something, that's where I start looking for Toronto.